There's an important distinction in Buddhism, and early Buddhism in particular, between knowing something based on faith and knowing it based on knowledge. So in today's video, we're going to discuss that difference and how they relate to each other, coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. In some religious traditions that we may be familiar with, such as Christianity, a belief based on faith is paramount, at least within the religious tradition itself. There's a sense in which certainty is beyond us, that certainty is something that's perhaps even divine, even perhaps relegated to the divine order, in the sense that humans, being limited creatures, don't have that real ability to be certain in the right sort of way. And so that what we have to rely on really only is faith. And what we're left with is a kind of residual skepticism, I think, at least in a certain understanding of skepticism within, let's say, the human realm, that we can't really know anything completely, that we can't have complete certainty, let's say. And the issue in Buddhism, however, is quite different, as we'll see. Now, there's what I'll be discussing here takes off on a paper by Guang, which I'll link to down below. I believe there's a link, but in any event, I'll cite the paper down below in case you're interested. And what he notes is that, to begin with, in early Buddhism, we don't find faith listed among the aspects of the path. When we look at the most famous, perhaps most discussed types of Buddhist path. So, for example, in early Buddhism, we have the shortest description, perhaps, which is the sort of threefold training of ethics, meditation, and wisdom. That threefold training doesn't include faith, at least objectively, it's not one of those three. Then we have perhaps the most famous, which is the Eightfold Path. And once again, in the Eightfold Path, you don't have faith as one of these 8 parts. There are lots of different parts, but none of them is faith in particular. Then we have the factors of awakening, the 7 factors of awakening. And once again, faith is not among those factors. We have, for example, the factor of investigation of states, it's sometimes translated, which is a state involved in curiosity and getting to know things, but we don't have any kind of description of faith as one of these factors. Now, that's not to say that faith isn't mentioned in some descriptions of the Buddhist path. It does exist in some, but it seems, given this kind of evidence that it is in some and isn't in others, that faith seems to be, at least in early Buddhism, to be an optional kind of thing. It's not something that's necessary, but something that is optional, that we can potentially make use of if we wish, but we don't have to use it if we don't want to. Alternately, we could understand that in descriptions such as the Eightfold Path, perhaps faith is just assumed. It's sort of a background condition. It's not something that's mentioned, but it's something that's sort of in the air, if you like. But nevertheless, even if that is a possibility, and I think it is, it's one way to understand things, there still are problems with faith described in the early Buddhist texts. That is, faith is not an unalloyed good in early Buddhism. And that's really going to be the point of this video, especially when we compare faith with knowledge. So, for example, in one of the early suttas, the Chanki Sutta, the Buddha is having an argument with a 16-year-old Brahmin prodigy named Kappatika Bharadvaja. And Kappatika Bharadvaja is a Vedic Brahmin, that is to say, he's been raised in the understanding, the knowledge, the memorization of the Vedas. And his teaching, his belief system, is that the Vedas contain all that is really true. That, as he says it, only this is true, only the Vedas are true, and everything else is foolish. Any other system, any other path, any other belief system is simply a waste of time. that the Vedas contain all that is real and true. And when he says this to the Buddha, I mean, he's come to the Buddha in order to argue with him, in order to put this to the Buddha, because he knows that the Buddha doesn't agree. And when he says this to the Buddha's response is to ask whether his teacher knows this directly, or whether his teacher knows this simply based on faith. And indeed, whether his teacher's teacher, again, knows this directly or simply based on faith. And back to teachers, and teachers, back into the centuries and so on, to the original seers that described these Vedas, that initiated them, that constructed them, if you like. And even them, the Buddha asks, did they know these things directly? Did they know them by direct seeing? Did they really know them? Or did they simply hold them based on their own faith? And it seems from Kapattika Bharadvaja that no, that none of these people knew these things directly. None of them had direct knowledge of them. All of them, from the very beginning up to his Kapattika Bharadvaja's own teachers, knew this based only on faith. And given this development in the argument, the Buddha then responds this way. He says, "It seems to me that the Brahman's statement turns out to be like a queue of blind men. The first one does not see, the middle one does not see, and the last one does not see. What do you think, Bharadvaja? This being so, doesn't the Brahman's faith turn out to be baseless?" So the Buddha argues here that these beliefs are based on simple blind faith. They're not based on anything secure. They're not based on the knowledge of anybody. And the problem here is that if we are to accept the word of another person, we're accepting it based on our belief that the other person knows what they're talking about. And if that person also believes based on faith, then our reason for believing what we believe becomes more and more tenuous, especially as this line of people gets longer and longer. We can think of a game of telephone in which the information that came from the far end has been transmitted by various people, and especially even if the person at the very end, if we have no reason to believe they knew what they were talking about, then it seems we have very little reason to believe what we in fact believe. And this is one of the problems about, in fact, picking a teacher, is that you have to rely on somebody else's word. You're picking someone on whose word to rely. But you're doing that before you yourself really have the wisdom to be able to determine whether the person you're picking is actually themselves wise. There seems to be a kind of a paradox here, or a catch-22. The Buddha, in another sutta called the Apannaka Sutta, goes to discuss similar matters with a group of lay people from Sala. And this group of lay people are somewhat confused, it seems. They don't really know who to follow. It's sort of a similar kind of situation to the Kalama Sutta that some of us will have heard about. I did an earlier video on that. I'll put a link to it down below. In both circumstances, the people in these villages have seen, so it seems, heard a lot of different seers and speakers and philosophers come through and give their own opinions, but they don't know who to follow, really. And indeed, the Buddha determines this when he first, in one of his first questions to them. When he sits down, he asks if these lay people in front of him, he asks them if they have found a teacher in whom to have, well, and he uses an expression in Pali which is translated various ways. Bhikkhu Sujato translates it as grounded faith, if they've found someone in whom to have grounded faith. Jnanamoli and Bodhi, a Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Jnanamoli, translate this as faith based on reasons. He's asking them if they have reasoned faith in a teacher. And they say that they haven't. They haven't been able to gain reasoned faith or grounded faith in a particular teacher. And given this problematic state of affairs, then the Buddha discusses with these people ways that they should approach reasoning and thought and all the rest. But that's not the point I want to make here. The point is that the Buddha asks them if they've found this faith based on reasons, this grounded faith. He doesn't ask if they've simply found faith in a teacher. That presumably for the Buddha wouldn't have mattered so much. The issue is finding what we might call reasoned confidence. Another word we can use for the word that we translate as faith from Pali is confidence. So the question is not, do we have a certain kind of positive affect or positive belief in somebody, but do we have reason for that belief? And this takes us to a central sutta discussing the role of faith in early Buddhism. This is a sutta that involves Citta the householder having an argument or discussion with Nigantanataputta. Nigantanataputta is the head of the Jain order. Jainism is a separate religion that seems to have arisen before Buddhism, somewhat before the Buddha's lifetime, and which he was to an extent reacting to in his own belief system. And Citta, who is a householder, he's not a monastic, but Citta is known as the wisest of the householders by the Buddha. He's somebody who the Buddha holds in high regard for his knowledge of the Dharma. And in this encounter with Nigantanataputta, he demonstrates, I think, a lot of that wisdom. And I think that's probably the reason why this particular sutta was remembered and recorded, if you like, down the centuries and millennia. So in this particular discussion, the argument is over a relatively abstruse kind of issue about meditative absorption. In particular, in Buddhism, and I wouldn't get too caught up in this. I'll try to describe it quickly, but if it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, it doesn't matter. That's not really the point that I want to get across in this video. In any event, in Buddhism, there are what are called jhanas, 4 jhanas, and these are progressively deeper states of meditative absorption. The first jhana is typified by, among other things, directed thought, if you like. There is an active kind of mental operation involved in making the first jhana come up and retaining that first jhana. However, these mental operations, it is said, die away in the second and third and fourth jhanas. In other words, they don't persist. So Nigantanataputta is having an argument with Citta about this, because in particular, Nigantanataputta doesn't believe that it's possible to have a state of absorptive meditation without active mental operation. So Nataputta asks Citta whether he has faith in the Buddha's claim that it's possible to have states of meditative absorption without mental operations. And Citta says, I don't rely on faith in the Buddha's claims about these things. Nataputta takes Citta to have said that he doesn't have faith in the Buddha. And in taking Citta that way, he falls into Citta's trap. What Nataputta then does is to say, aha, yes, you don't have faith in the Buddha either. The Buddha's claims are foolish, and then Nataputta goes through some discussion about why these claims are foolish. However, once he says this, then Citta responds by asking Nataputta which is superior, knowledge or faith. And Nataputta says, knowledge is clearly superior to faith. And then what Citta says in response is, indeed so, I don't believe these things based on faith in the Buddha. I don't rely on any kind of faith in the Buddha when it comes to these kinds of claims, because I know them directly. I have seen for myself that there are states without directed mental operation that are absorptive in this sense. In other words, what Citta goes on to say is he himself has achieved these deeper jhanic states, and so as a result, his belief about them doesn't rely upon any kind of faith in the Buddha or the Buddha's claims. He says, And so, sir, since I know and see like this, why should I rely on faith in another ascetic or Brahmin who claims there is such a state? That is, faith is unnecessary when you can know and see for yourself. Knowledge and vision are two of the most important features as we progress along the Buddhist path, this ability to know and see for ourselves. For example, it's one thing to believe, let's say, based on faith or based on some kind of confidence, that unskillful states are in fact bad for us. Let's say states of anger or greed, hatred. However, it's one thing to believe those based on faith or confidence, and it's another thing to, in meditation or in daily life, come to see directly, to know and see for yourself that these states are not good for you. And I think that's what we do. That's part of the purpose of mindfulness meditation, is to become witness to the bad effects, let's say, of hatred upon us, to the bad effects of greed. And this direct seeing, this seeing and knowing, is the kind of thing that changes us. And it does so slowly, clearly over a period of time, a long period of time perhaps, but nevertheless, little by little, it chips away at our ordinary way of approaching the world as we begin to see what the Buddha is trying to show us. Now, this is not to say, none of this is to say that faith has no place in early Buddhism, and indeed much the opposite. As I've said before, faith does indeed occur in some descriptions of the path, and faith is lauded under certain circumstances. It can provide us energy. It can forestall our doubts for a time. It can provide a lot of beneficial features. The only problem with faith is that it's fickle in the sense that it can lead us astray as well. So we have to be careful how we apportion our faith, let's say, to our belief system. And I would say that when it comes to forestalling doubt, when it comes to assuaging our doubts, faith, of course, as I say, can play a role, but in the final analysis, the best way to forestall doubts, to get rid of doubts, is to come to know and see for ourselves directly. Once we have done that, then of course doubt has no place. We have seen that doubt is not reasonable in this circumstance. I did an earlier video, as I mentioned, on faith in Buddhism, faith in early Buddhism in particular, and I'll put a link to it here up on the screen in case you want to know more. If you find these videos of mine useful, please do check out my Patreon page. Thanks to all my Patreons, thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. And meanwhile, all of you be well.